everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. Well, look what we got here on the table. We got a pair of PPSs. We've got an original one, probably now being called the Classic, and we've got an M2 behind it. And we've got videos on each of these if you want to look at the details of them, want to see more information on one or the other. This is going to be a fairly short video today. I'm simply going to kind of show you the differences between them. That if you're trying to decide, do I go Classic, which right now you can find them discounted in a number of places, or do I go M2, I'm going to give you some of the information that will help you make that decision. And I'm going to give you my opinion on some of the changes as to whether it was a positive or a negative change. But keep in mind, that's just my opinion. You may have a difference on it. You might like one of the new features that I don't. But at least you'll know what they are and you can make your own call. So we'll go ahead and first we'll take these things out and I'll show you that they're unloaded before we go any further. There's one. And there's the other. They both have the option of 6, 7, or 8 round magazines. Right now with the M2 there's a little bit of magazine availability issue, but that's just because it's new. That'll rectify itself, so that in and of itself probably wouldn't be a determining factor unless you're looking to fully kit yourself out right now. So I want to go to the two biggest changes first and then go into some of the other more nuancey changes. One of the most significant changes, and one I would probably consider a neutral change, but some people are really going to have an opinion one way or another, is the magazine release. The M2 has a push-button magazine release. It's easily accessed by your thumb and it works quite well. It does eject the magazine quite well. The Classic has a paddle style release. It's right here. You can operate it with your trigger finger, you can operate it with your offhand, but you have to pull this thing down. This is kind of a contentious thing. A lot of people don't like these, but in all reality, once you get used to operating it, you can simply move your trigger finger down without changing your grip. You don't have to rotate to get your thumb in position. You simply bring your finger down and hit it. I'm going to call that neutral. I do like the paddle release. I think it works well, but both work. You can eject the magazine. They're both fully functional. Whichever one you got, train with it, learn how to use it, and you're good to go. One other difference is there is no interchangeable backstraps on the M2, whereas the Classic had an interchangeable backstrap. The interchangeable backstrap to me is a nice feature. Taking that away is a negative, because with that you could customize this relatively narrow grip to better fit your hand by simply installing a different backstrap. And these are actually fairly easy to install. You just kind of reach underneath, pop them off. You don't need tools even to do them. So I do think that removing that feature was a negative. Now when they removed that feature, they removed another feature which was actually kind of quite useless. Removing the backstrap on the Classic disabled the weapon. Presumably you could use it as a like a locking mechanism, though I think it's kind of dubious whether or not that would actually meet various state requirements as a lock, because it doesn't require a key. You jam a screwdriver up in the right place and the gun would start to function again. So getting rid of that somewhat useless feature is probably a positive as far as the lock part of it, but losing the backstrap I would say is a negative. One other one that I probably would count as a negative, but others might kind of do neutral. The Classic had a Picatinny Rail. It was only a single slot, but as you've seen in our video from our reviewing the Classic, we have a Railmaster, Crimson Trace Railmaster on it, that brings the fingers right back by the trigger guard, make it very easy to operate. The M2, they removed that Picatinny Rail, presumably to make it a little more contoured and easy to holster, but in all reality the other one was pretty smooth and rounded and really did holster easily. So I'm not really sure that that made a significant difference overall, but it definitely took away the ability to mount a laser or something like that, or a light. So you'll have to wait for the aftermarket to catch up if you get an M2 and you want a laser or a light on it. A few of the other things they did put serrations on the front of the slide on the M2. You'll see on the Classic that it was just smooth. It had kind of a little ledge here you could catch with your hand, but if you didn't have stronger fingers, your fingers would slide off that. With this, it's real easy to do press checks. So if you're somebody that likes to do press checks or operate the slide from the front with the cocking serrations at the front, you can now easily do that. The back serrations didn't change a whole lot. The other thing they changed was the magazine release. And this is going to be a little tough to show. I'm going to try to show you I'm sorry, it was the slide catch. The slide catch on the Classic is inside this little ridge, but it protrudes. And it's kind of difficult to show. Let's see if I get it to an angle you can see it. You can see that it protrudes a little bit. So it's far enough back in that it's easy to you're not going to easily hit it by accident. But when you're trying to sweep your thumb down and catch it, you see how it's catching my thumb. So when I'm deliberately wanting to release it, so for example, if I lock it back and I sweep my thumb down, it's easy to catch it and release it. On the M2, it's completely encapsulated inside this little protection, and very little of it protrudes. Presumably that's going to reduce the likelihood of you riding it or catching it on something, but what it effectively does is it makes it very smooth. As I run my thumb across it, my thumb is not really catching it very well. So if I have it locked back, it's a little bit harder to get your thumb on it enough. I'm actually putting quite a bit of pressure on it and it's not catching it, and I finally just got it. So it's a little bit more difficult with the M2, with that extra protection around it, to actually catch it when you want to and use it to release the slide. So you may find yourself slingshotting this more often than you might have with the Classic. But that's one of those things. It could be whichever you like. From a grip perspective, this has a grip texture similar to the PPS. This is the M2. It's very nicely contoured, very nicely textured. It has finger grips. So it fits well in your hand, and it's kind of rounded a little bit to fit better in your hand and give you, that contoured grip. Whereas if you look at the M1, it's basically flat on both sides. It does have some texture and some serrations. It's got some texture at the back, right here, and it's got slight finger grooves with some texture, but it's basically kind of a squarish flat grip that some people did have a bit of a hard time holding on to it. So the contoured grip that comes with this one might be a little bit easier for you to get a hold of and might work a little bit better in your hands. Unfortunately, however, with the loss of the removable backstrap, you may have a hard time configuring it to actually work exactly the way you want it to. The triggers are very similar. One of the things we did notice that is on the M2, the tension required to take that little split trigger up and make it disappear, it's little bit less tension, so that when you pull on the trigger, you're less likely to feel this protrusion. Some people are sensitive to that and they feel that it bites into their finger. This one kind of takes up with a little bit less effort. This one sticks out a little bit further and takes a little more effort. And we're talking minimal effort. It takes a little bit more effort to pick it up. Overall, the triggers are very similar. We've kind of found that they're slightly different in their take-up and brake characteristics, but it's relatively minor. In all, we do prefer the trigger on the Classic a little bit better, but we're kind of nitpicking at that point. We're looking at just minor differences. But let me show you the trigger on this one. There's the take-up. So this is the M2. There's the take-up. A little bit of creep and the brake. Kind of a moderate reset. This isn't meant to be a competition gun. And then a crisp brake. Coming off the reset, there seems to be a little less creep in the brake. And this is the Classic. Trigger's a little bit heavier, but a very, very short crisp brake. Very little creep at all. And there's the reset. Reset's roughly the same. And then the brake. So the brake on this one's a little shorter and crisper. There's a little bit more creep in the brake on the M2, but it's not significant enough to make a difference. The slide operation is a little bit different. And this one, if you pull back the slide on the Classic that I've got here, it's kind of heavy to get started. And there's, as I go back and forth, you see it kind of jitter. There's almost a little bit of like a lockup action. And that's normal. The gun's not malfunctioning. That's how the Classics work. So there's this point where it feels like it's kind of hanging up, but it's actually part of the way the barrel's moving, and you kind of almost feel like kind of a little stutter, a lockup. Both of the Classics we have do that. Both of them work flawlessly at the range, so it's not a defect. but it is a little harder to get it started, and that kind of gives you a little bit of a hang-up feeling that may take some getting used to. The M2, they've changed the way it works. It doesn't do that. It's much lighter, and just even starting it up, it's much lighter, and the overall pull is relatively smooth. So if you've got a little bit weaker hands, racking the slide on a gun is kind of difficult for you, you may want to try both the Classic and the M2, but you may find that the slide on the M2 is just a little easier to pull, and without that perceived lockup in the middle of it, you'll find it a lot easier to operate if you've got weaker hands. Overall, it's going to come down to whichever one of these you pick, you're going to get an extremely high quality weapon. And whichever one you pick, you spend a little time at the range. If you pick this one, you'll adapt your grip and your handling of it to fit the gun. If you pick the Classic, then you may be able to change the backstraps out and kind of get it to fit your hand. You can't go wrong picking either one of these guns, and you'll get the quality that you get with a Walther. So the magazines are roughly the same. One other thing I'll show you real quick. The M2, this is an M2 magazine, and you'll see that it continues the grip, continues the contour, kind of like the PPS does. The PPQ. And here's the Classic. It does the same thing. It continues the contour, but of course the grip is flatter. So either one of these guns you can get a full 3-finger grip on, whichever one you purchase. One thing you will note though, there is no magazine compatibility between the two generations. So for example, if you already have an M1 and an assortment of magazines for it, they won't work in the M2, and vice versa. So if you've got an installed base of magazines, or you're looking to fully set up a kit of magazines and get up and running right away, as of the filming of this video, the 8-round magazines for the M2 are not available. They will exist, they are listed, and they'll eventually become available, so it's just a matter of time. But right now, it's the 6 and 7 round magazines that come with it are your only available option. And go ahead, pick out your PPS, excellent carry gun, whichever one you pick. Look at the various pros and cons, and it may just come down to what you can get your hands on. Right now I know you can get these fairly well discounted, so if the features of the M1 are attractive to you, you might be able to save a little money and get the same quality. Other than that, if you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe. Have a great day. Thank you.